Thank you, Roloff, for the nice introduction. It's really great to have you all. I've seen many of you last year, and it's great to have you back. And for those of you who came this year for the first time, welcome. So an important element of this conference this year was the data challenge. This group of students are experiencing way outside of their classroom. But as you know, data analytics is contagious. You touch it, you feel it, it goes to the other person. And they wanted to create that experience for other students around campus. So we came up with this challenge because there are so many important issues that affect us all, including the next generation and the generation after that. This challenge was centered around the 17 sustainability goals designed by the UN and accepted by all UN member states. And these issues range from healthy lives, gender equality, climate change, what's not, and more. So we picked the most overarching goals of this entire important issue in our life, and we wanted to tell the story, or we want to push others to tell the story. If you don't tell the story, then it will remain as simply a goal. So we have amazing, amazing submissions throughout this competition. And I thank all of you who made our life really difficult to come up with a winner. And unfortunately, there should be a winner, although we feel there is one thing in common among all these submissions, that they are all great. And we really had a hard time to choose. When you tell a story, there are a number of elements you have to look at. You have to first tell us why it matters to you, and why you have to think about this as a societal issue affecting all of us. But you have to also make it clear that there is an urgent call for action. We looked at those important elements beyond the mathematical, the statistical gymnastics when we review all these submissions. So I have the pleasure of inviting and congratulating this year's winner. But before I invite him to the podium, we would like to show you a review of the submissions which made the final, the top 5 submissions during this year. Let's take a moment.
Story is about this blue planet that we all call Earth.
What I'm going to concentrate on is sustainable consumption and production patterns for future generations.
The Sustainable Development Goal number 3.
Global climate change is a very hot topic right now, and I want to keep that momentum going.
That was a glimpse of the top 5 finalists. So it is now my pleasure to welcome here this year's winner of this competition, Eduardo Retes. Congratulations.
Can everybody hear me fine? Yes? Okay, so thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you all for being here. Today I'm going to show all of you how you can tackle real-world problems with the use of data. So basically what I did here was I took a look at Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is promoting well-being and healthy lives for everyone, especially looking at tuberculosis, which is an infectious disease that basically hinders development, so it's a pressing issue in the world of economic development, health, and public policy. So what is tuberculosis? In its basis, tuberculosis is a disease that spreads through the air particles, and it has first and second line treatments, which means that if you get sick with tuberculosis and you get treated and that fails, then basically you're going to go into that second line of treatment. And I make the claim that this is prevalent in places with high poverty, and if you connect that with the fact that it travels through the air, it makes sense, because in poor countries, it is way more likely to have people living in these conditions where they're up close, they don't have enough space, they work in places where the conditions are not ideal, and with all of the interactions between people, then it is more likely to spread through there. To prove my point, I basically ran this exponential regression on GDP per capita and tuberculosis incidence. And as you can see, 94% of the variation of tuberculosis and HIV prevalence in countries can be explained by the GDP per capita. Of course, this is not the cause of tuberculosis in these countries, but you can see that there is a very strong correlation, which is something that we should be looking around in our everyday lives. Then I asked my question, which is, what courses of action and policy plans can we start implementing today in order for us to reach our goals of basically promoting well-being and helping these countries develop? So using a couple of data samples and panels from the World Health Organization and the Global Fund, what I did was ran a couple of numbers, saw the trends, and came up with the issues that basically are the ones that are more pressing within this matter. The prevalence of HIV, on par with tuberculosis. Then we have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, which I'll explain what it is in a later slide, and the fact that our data on this is actually very limited, and that is one of the problems that actually hinders how much progress we can do. So the first issue is HIV. So as most of you know, HIV is a condition where basically if it hinders your ability to fight off infections. And what this happens is that, as shown in the data, over time, we can see that the prevalence and the link between HIV and tuberculosis has an upwards trend in every country that there was a sample of data from. So what this means is that if we want to solve the problem of tuberculosis, given that HIV cannot be cured, then we have to look at this strong link between HIV and tuberculosis so that we can tackle both problems at the same time. The second issue is multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. This basically means that if you recall the first and second line treatments, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis comes when the first line treatment fails, and then therefore people become resistant to the first treatment, and then they have to go to a second line of treatment, which should be, in essence, more effective. Hopefully you can see here that not adjusted for population, so given the fact that the United States has over 300 million people living there, our sample in Africa shows that there is way more prevalence there than in any other of the developed countries that we took a sample of. So why is this the case? Well, this prevalence can actually be explained with the number of relapses that there were in every country. So if you look at New Zealand, Germany, Canada, Australia, the number of relapses is almost zero, which means that in all the sub-Saharan African countries that we managed to get a sample of, there's way more relapses. And this means that it's happening because people are not finishing their first line treatment. So these treatments tends to be very long, 6 months to a year. So when people start this treatment and we don't have the data or the follow-up that is supposed to happen, then people will stop taking this treatment, fail, they'll become resistant, and then therefore they're gonna have to go to a second line of treatment. And then the third issue that we have is data. If you have a keen eye, you probably notice that in many of these graphs, the samples and the countries that were shown are actually different, or some of them appeared or some of them don't. This is actually one of the biggest problems that we have in the world of health, and especially in tuberculosis research is that many countries don't even have the infrastructure and the funding to allow us to know the magnitude of the problem is. So the data suggests, and you can trust me on this, that some of the countries that show this problem actually have a bigger problem because those countries who tend to spend more on healthcare have a bigger number of cases, which is counterintuitive. That basically means that the countries that spend more money actually just have more infrastructure to pinpoint what are the cases, which doesn't happen. So grossly misunderrepresented data samples here. Okay, so we do have some treatment. So then what happens if we actually approach this with our treatment? So you can see here that the average success rate is actually pretty high, 70 to 85, 90%, which means that when we do have the ability to pinpoint these cases of tuberculosis in each country, we do have high success rates. But what's the problem? If we fail our first line treatment and go to the second line treatment, over time, no matter the country, you're not going to be sure whether your treatment is going to be successful or not. And this is the thing that we want to avoid. If we pinpoint tuberculosis from the start and we treat it properly, we're going to avoid the problem where we get multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And therefore, we don't have to deal with the uncertainty that comes from it because our data and our research on it is very limited. So, given that we know all this and given that we have pinpointed the most pressing issues, what can we do about it? Because that's what it's all about, solving these problems. So you can basically take two roads at the same time. You can start preventing. So you can advocate for anti-discrimination laws and better working conditions, because what this will cause is that people will not be exposed to the conditions that are very prevalent in tuberculosis. So if people are working in better workspaces, they won't be as close as each other, and they will be able to avoid basically being subject to this disease. And we have to provide support to those HIV and TB patients, make them feel like they're welcome in health centers so that they can be treated, and therefore when we put this link together, we can start treating them and we won't have the problem where we don't even know who the people who have tuberculosis are. And therefore, to supplement that, we take some action. So we have to start creating databases in order for us to know who the people that have TB are, and we have to have these databases in order for us to follow up on their treatments so that these treatments can be successful, and then there's no more relapse, which is what we want to avoid. We also have to advocate that in every country there's primary healthcare systems and universal healthcare systems so that we know that these people are actually getting treated. And third, we have to invest in research, because that's what we're lacking here. Tuberculosis was a problem that we thought we had solved, but actually caught up to us and our research. So therefore, while we are doing all of this, we have to invest in new ways of trying to solve this, especially the problem of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. So thank you for listening, and hopefully you learned something new and learn how to apply data to everyday pressing issues.